Right now, we are looking at what would just so happen to be the original Gotei 13 that would have existed 1,000 years ago. These captains would be described as cold-hearted killers, and the captains that are present in the story now would be seen as weak in comparison to the originals. The very thing that would make the original captains stand out above the rest is the very fact that they would be feared above all else. And when taking a look at the original captains of the Gotei 13, what would immediately catch our eyes is a Genryusai in his prime. A younger Genryusai would be described as a beast with the sword, and he would use anything and everything to kill his opponent, while the lives of his allies and companions meant little to nothing to him. It's as plain as day to see that Genryusai used to be completely merciless in the past. And as we already know, over time he would eventually change. The same could be said for another character that we are also familiar with that is a part of the original Gotei 13, with them being Urahara. She would be a perfect example of the cold-hearted nature of the original Gotei 13. Urahara would find bliss and pleasure in combat itself, to a point that she would even be bloodthirsty. In that sense, she can even give you a decent idea of how the other members of the court guards would act, especially since they're described to be murderers. Unfortunately, we know little to nothing about them. However, there's something that you could take notice of. Among the originals, we have Shihoin Chika, whose household name stands out above anything else. Shihoin Chika shares the same family name as Shihoin Yoruichi, and so they would come from the same exact clan, which means that Shihoin Chika would end up being Yoruichi's ancestor who existed from 1,000 years ago. This would make Yoruichi a descendant of Chikas. Chika would also lead the second division, which means that Chika would fight using the methods of stealth, and this would also happen to be the same division that Yoruichi would end up being a captain of. Next, we would have Izuhara Kenroku. Izuhara would be the original captain of the third company. This company would end up specializing in following the traditional methods of the Soul Society. Izuhara could really be someone who values the order and rules that the world has set out for him. Sitting at the fourth seat, we have Shijima Chikiri, meaning that Shijima was the original medic for the Gotei 13. Rather than being on the front lines, Shijima, if need be, would stay back and heal anyone who was damaged from fighting in combat. And as we know, Urahara would end up taking up the mantle and Shijima's role. What exactly leads to this makes this character all the more interesting. The same could be said for Urahara as well. At the fifth seat, we would have Obana Dandro, with their armor standing out above anything else, which makes you question whether or not he has a specific samurai lineage that exists within the Soul Society. In the sixth seat, we have Saito Furofushi, whose weapon has a similar resemblance to that of Toshiro's, and by drawing a connection through their sword designs, she could quite possibly use an elemental Shikai and Bankai. I sincerely doubt that ice is going to be the only element we see anyone fight with. What could she use? Could she be a fire user just like Genryusai, but use this ability in a completely different way, or use a different element altogether? Even so, Chojuro and Genryusai both use elemental properties to fight, and their sword hilts aren't the same as Saito's or Toshiro's, so maybe her ability could just be a dragon. Anyway, we already know that the real star of the show is Saito's eye patch. Now we have Shigyu no Butsuna. When taking in his appearance, he almost looks zombie-like. His hands happen to be very interesting, especially since he's wearing gloves. Clearly he is hiding something, and we can tell by looking at his wrists. His skin darkens and coils at that specific area. His hands could quite possibly have burn wounds from fighting or possibly sparring with Genryusai. With that being said, the smoke around Shigyu is very interesting because it could lead to a connection between either his Shikai or Bankai. If not, it's very ominous and really gives off an impression on his character. He seems very yokai-esque, and I wouldn't be surprised if he actually was one. In the 8th seat, we have Katoribashi Unsai, and she just so happens to be my favorite. Unlike the other captains, her weapon isn't a katana. In fact, it's actually a spear. She shares a likeness with Lisa Yadamaru, with both of them using glasses and wearing spears. Yes, if you wear glasses and use a spear, you're the same person. But in all seriousness, coincidentally, they were both captains of the 8th Division. Kotori could quite possibly be an ancestor of Lisa's, especially since their appearances are the same and they end up being captains of the same division. They may not share a family name, but their name could have changed over time. The 9th Division's original captain would be Kumoi and Tetsu. He would stand out because his weapon would be like a baton or a club, and he would pummel his enemies to death with every swing. At seat 10, we would have Outokawa Furuoki, and he would be wearing an amigasa, which is a hat that would be worn in Japanese folk dances. Taking that into consideration, he could have ties to the kabuki and even have a bankai that is very reminiscent of it. At seat 12, Zenjo Gyuhin would be the captain of a traditionally run division. However, after Urahara's captaincy, he would turn this division into the Research and Development Division, ultimately allowing the 12th Division to be used for science. Zenju would boast enough strength to kill enemies with his bare hands alone. And finally, at the seat of 13, we have Sakahone Saizo. He's probably the most experienced out of anyone here. What more do I need to say?